I sat in the courtroom, tension thick in the air. Across from me was Elise, my soon-to-be ex-wife, her perfect hair and tailored suit making her look like she'd already won. Next to her, Dominic Wells, her attorney, leaned back with that insufferable smirk. "Enjoy your new life," Dominic said. "You'll be leaving with nothing." Elise didn't even look at me. "You should have been a better husband, Marcus. A better business partner." I felt my heart slam against my chest but kept my face steady, eyes locked on Judge Harmon's weathered hands. "Mr. Chen, do you have any final words before I make my ruling?" the judge asked. The room went quiet. I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I reached into my briefcase for the thick folder I'd spent months putting together. "Actually, yes," I said, sliding it across the table. "I'd like to submit this as evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow and took it. Elise's head snapped up, eyes narrowing, but I didn't look at her. Not yet. That morning 6 months ago played in my mind. I'd shuffled into the kitchen to find Elise standing by the counter, holding a manila envelope, eyes glued to her phone. "Morning," I mumbled. She slid the envelope across the counter. "I've spoken to my lawyer. This should be simple." I froze. 10 years we'd been married, 10 years building Prism Digital together, and this was how it ended. I picked up the envelope. Divorce papers. Her signature already there, neat and sharp. My eyes scanned the pages. I was getting nothing. No stake in the company I'd helped build, no share of our assets, nothing for a decade of work. "Elise," I said, voice rough, "what is this?" She finally glanced at me, eyes cool. "It's over, Marcus. You knew this was coming." Did I? I stood there, papers shaking in my hands, floor dropping out from under me. I'd spent years supporting her, pouring myself into Prism Digital. I wasn't the flashy one. I didn't charm clients, but I was the backbone. I'd handled operations, systems architecture, troubleshooting servers at 3 a.m. And now she was tossing me out like hired help she didn't need anymore. "After everything," I said, "this is what I get." She sighed. "You didn't keep up, Marcus." I grew. "You didn't." The words hit me like a punch. Something inside me snapped, not loud, just a quiet break, like a string pulled too tight. By the time she left for work, I was still on the couch. The door slammed, and silence swallowed me whole. I looked around the room, our photos, our furniture, our life, and it hit me. She'd planned this. She'd been steps ahead, plotting this goodbye while I was still playing the loyal husband. But as minutes ticked by, something else grew inside me, not just hurt, not just anger, but something harder, sharper. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. I picked up my phone and called Leo Kim, an old college friend now working as a paralegal. "I need your help. Elise is trying to take everything." He didn't hesitate. "Meet me tomorrow, coffee shop on Valencia." I thanked him, then dialed Ava Rodriguez, a cybersecurity specialist I'd met at a tech conference. "I need you to track some data, old files, accounts, access logs." She laughed. "If it's on mine, I can find it." That afternoon, I started pulling things together. I rummaged through our home office where I'd spent countless hours working for free. Old laptops, papers, USB drives she'd forgotten about. She'd always been careless with details, leaving me to clean up. Now that would bite her. By sunset, I had a plan. Leo would help with legal angles. Ava would dig into accounts she'd locked me out of. And me, I'd piece it all together, every contribution I'd made, every hour I'd spent building her empire. Elise thought she'd left me with nothing, but she didn't know what I was capable of. Not yet. The nights blended together after that morning with the divorce papers. The living room became my war room, papers scattered across the table, laptop glowing in the dark, cold coffee forgotten. "You're not going to believe this," Ava said over video chat. "Prism Digital's client data reports don't match their financial statements. Not even close." "What do you mean?" "They're reporting 43% growth in user engagement to investors, but actual backend data shows maybe 15%. They're inflating everything: user numbers, metrics, conversion rates." She pushed her glasses up. "Marcus, this isn't creative accounting. This is fraud." I sat back, stomach twisting. Part of me had suspected something wasn't right. "There's more," Ava continued. "They're running 2 sets of books, one for investors, one internal. And there are regular transfers to offshore accounts that don't appear in any official records." "Can you trace them?" "Already did. Shell companies, Marcus. 5 of them, all in the Cayman Islands. All connected to Prism through a maze of subsidiaries. This wasn't just about Elise cheating me out of the divorce. This was bigger, darker. The next morning, I met Leo at a quiet cafe. He listened as I laid out what Ava and I had found. "This is heavy stuff," he said finally. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, maybe money laundering. The SEC would have a field day." "What about the divorce? Can I use any of this?" He tapped his fingers on the table. "Legally, yes. If she's hiding assets or committing fraud through a company you helped build, that's relevant. But Marcus," he leaned forward, "once you open this door, there's no closing it. This goes beyond your divorce. This could end with Elise in prison." I stared into my coffee. 10 years of marriage. 10 years building something together. Did I want to see her in handcuffs? Did I want to be the one who put her there? "I need to think about it," I said. I didn't have to wait long to see how right he was about things getting ugly. That night, I came home to find my laptop missing. The condo looked untouched, but my computer was gone. A cold feeling spread through my chest as I checked my hiding spots. The backup drives were still there, overlooked. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off while you still can." I called Ava immediately. They took my laptop, and I got a warning text. "Shit, did they get the drives?" "No, but they know I'm digging." "Come to my place. Now, bring everything. And Marcus, pay cash for the BART." 2 hours later, I was in Ava's apartment in Oakland. We worked through the night, Ava breaking into Prism's systems while I pieced together the financial trail. By morning, we had a complete map of Elise's fraud, user data manipulated, revenue numbers doctored, client funds siphoned through fake vendors into offshore accounts. And then I found something that stopped me cold. "Ava, look at these payments." She leaned over my shoulder. "To Ryan Mercer? Who's that?" "Elise's strategic advisor," I said bitterly. "The guy she started mentioning a couple years back. I'd seen him at a company gala once, tall, slick, too friendly with her, his hand lingering on our arm while I stood across the room. The payments started small, a few thousand labeled as consulting fees, but grew to $50,000, $100,000, all funneled through Prism like legitimate business. "Not just her boyfriend," I said. "Her paid boyfriend, funded with investor money." Ava's hand came to rest on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Marcus." I wanted to smash something, to storm out and confront Elise. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, saved the file, and kept going. Anger wasn't enough. I needed strategy. The folder I was building grew thicker every day. I cross-checked dates, matched payments to projects, dug into every corner of the business. I found more fake charitable write-offs, donations to groups that didn't exist, all logged as tax deductions. She'd siphoned millions while I was balancing her spreadsheets, thinking we were building a future. But then things started getting weird. Leo called. "My office got broken into last night. Files tossed, nothing big taken." Later that day, my bank account was frozen solid, no explanation. Then Leo texted, "Guy in a black sub followed me home. Be careful." My hands went cold. Elise wasn't just rattled, she was panicking. Then my email pinged a new message from an address I didn't recognize. "Check the attachments before it's too late." Inside were photos of Elise and Dominic at a cafe, heads bent close, and a woman I didn't recognize sitting across from them. Sharp suit, dark hair, a notepad in her hand. I forwarded the email to Ava. "Who's the woman?" The next day, Ava called. "That woman. Special Agent Maya Patel, FBI Cybercrimes Division. Prism Digital is on their radar. Data fraud, securities violations, maybe more." My breath caught. FBI. Suddenly, the break-in at Leo's office, the threatening text, the tale, it all made sense. Elise wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting something way bigger. "What do I do?" I asked. "Keep your head down, but don't stop. They're watching her, not you. Yet." 3 days later, I received a message from Jasmine Liu, a former UX designer at Prism who'd left abruptly last year. "We need to talk. I have something you should see." We met at a park. Jasmine looked nervous, constantly scanning our surroundings. "I saw the FBI visiting the office," she said. "And I heard your name mentioned. They think you're building a case." "I am," I admitted, "but not for them, not intentionally." She handed me a sealed envelope. "This might help. It's why I left Prism. Elise asked me to falsify user engagement data for the Series C funding. When I refused, she threatened to blacklist me. I kept copies of everything." Inside was a signed affidavit and screenshots of Elise's emails explicitly directing data manipulation. The final piece I needed. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Jasmine's eyes hardened. "Because she doesn't get to win. Not after what she did to all of us." I nodded. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It never had been. The courtroom felt different that day, heavier somehow. I sat at my table, my folder sitting in front of me like a loaded gun. Across the room, Elise perched in her chair, eyes flicking between me and the judge. Dominic sat beside her, his usual smirk dialed back to something tighter. My attorney, Tara Okafor, gave me a small nod. I'd handed her the folder days ago, and she'd told me, "This changes everything. Just wait for the right time." Judge Harmon looked up at us. "We're here to finalize the division of assets. Any last submissions before I rule?" Dominic stood, smoothing his tie, ready to launch into why Elise deserved it all. But before he could speak, I raised my hand. "Your Honor, I have something to submit." The judge nodded, and I slid the folder across to the bailiff. Elise's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing, but I kept my gaze on the judge. He opened the folder, fingers moving slowly at first, then pausing as he read. The room went quiet, and I watched his expression shift. His brows furrowed, his mouth tightened. I knew what he was seeing: tax evasion records, investor fraud, fake charitable write-offs, bank statements showing offshore transfers, invoices for shell companies, payments to Ryan Mercer labeled as consulting. Dominic shifted in his seat, fingers tapping the table. Elise leaned toward him, whispering something sharp, but he shook his head, eyes locked on that folder like it was a bomb. And it was. I'd made sure every piece was airtight. Leo had checked the legal angles, Ava had pulled the digital trails, and I'd connected it all. Finally, the judge set the folder down and looked up at Elise. "Miss Chen, these are serious allegations." Dominic shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. This is a stunt." The judge cut him off. "Sit down, counselor. I'll decide what's relevant." Dominic sank back, face red. Elise wasn't smirking now. She was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, skin pale. I leaned back, letting the moment settle. For months, I'd been the one on the ropes. But now she was the one squirming, and I was holding the cards. The judge started asking questions, slow, deliberate ones directed at Elise's team. "Can you explain these transfers to the Cayman Islands?" Dominic stumbled over his words, something about business expenses. "And these payments to Mr. Mercer, what consulting services did he provide?" Elise's voice broke in, sharp and shaky. "That's private. This doesn't belong here." But the judge didn't let up. I sat there, silent, watching it unfold. By the time he called a recess, Elise's team was scrambling. She shot me a look, pure venom, eyes blazing with fear or fury or both. I met her gaze, calm and steady. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello." A deep voice came through. "Back off," it said. No hello, no explanation. The next morning, Tara called. Elise's team filed a motion. They want to settle. Full offer, condo included, some cash too. I leaned against the kitchen counter. A settlement. After everything, they were waving a white flag. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a bribe. "They're scared," Tara added. That folder hit a nerve. "What do you think?" I asked. "We've got him on the ropes. If you want more, we keep going." I set the mug down. I wasn't done. Not yet. I met Tara at her office a few days later. She handed me a sealed file. "This came from a source I trust. Open it when you're alone." Back home, I locked the door and opened the file. Inside was an affidavit signed by Jasmine Liu. She laid it all out: Elise faking data, manipulating metrics, funneling kickbacks. Worse, Dominic knew. He'd helped cover it up. This was the smoking gun, and it wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was criminal. Jasmine's affidavit tied everything together. Elise had built Prism Digital into a front, and I'd been too busy playing the loyal husband to see it. But now I saw. The FBI was circling. Tara had confirmed it. The feds are watching her company. Your folder probably tipped them off. I didn't know if I'd started this or just sped it up, but I was in it now. The threats weren't just Elise's panic, they were her trying to plug a leak that was already flooding. I wasn't the silent husband anymore. I was the guy with proof, and I wasn't running from it. The final hearing crept up fast. I took my seat next to Tara, hands steady despite the storm inside me. Across the room, Elise sat rigid, face drawn tight. Dominic was beside her, tie crooked, swagger replaced by a twitchy edge. Judge Harmon banged his gavel, closing statements. Let's wrap this up. Dominic stood first, launching into why Elise deserved it all. His voice was confident at first, but I caught the cracks the way his eyes flicked to me, the slight stumble over his words. The judge nodded at me. Mr. Chen. I stood. Your Honor, I have one final file. I reached into my briefcase for the new folder thicker than the last, packed with everything we'd found since the affidavit. The courtroom went still. I handed it to the bailiff and watched Elise's face as the judge took it. Her eyes widened, hands gripping the table, panic flashing across her face. Dominic shot up. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. Sit down. The judge opened the folder and started reading. I knew what was in their emails tying Elise to Victor Zhao, the financial fixer, proof of shell corporations, transactions matching Jasmine's affidavit. The judge's face darkened with every page. Elise whispered something to Dominic, but he just shook his head. They were sinking. The judge looked up at Elise. Ms. Chen, these documents suggest serious misconduct beyond the scope of this divorce. Can your counsel explain? Dominic fumbled. Your Honor, this is unverified. The judge cut him off. It's part of my courtroom now. Sit. Elise turned to me, eyes wide. You don't know what you've done. I met her gaze. I think I do. This court will recess, the judge said. I'm referring these documents to the proper authorities. We're done here. The gavel banged, and the room erupted. I stood there, feeling the weight lift just a little. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about ending it, about dragging every lie into the light. The week after passed in a blur. Elise's arrest hit the news 7 days later. Handcuffs, a mugshot, Prism Digital splashed across headlines as a suspected front for fraud. I saw it on my phone, sitting in my apartment with coffee. Her assets were frozen. The business collapsed overnight. Dominic got disbarred, his career torched. As for me, the judge's ruling came through. I got the condo, a fair chunk of what was left of her accounts, and the satisfaction of knowing the truth had won. But it didn't feel like a win. I stood in the living room of the condo that first night, the place too empty, every corner echoing with 10 years of a life that didn't exist anymore. I'd spent so long fighting, digging, proving I wasn't the nobody Elise thought I was, and now it was over. Yet I didn't know what this was. I packed a small bag that evening and locked the door behind me. The condo could wait. I needed air, space, something new. I drove north, no real plan. Pacifica was where I landed, a quiet coastal town, all salt air and gray waves, far enough from San Francisco to feel like a different world. The first morning there, I woke up in a rented cabin, the sound of the ocean creeping through the window. No phone buzzing, no files to pore over, just the steady crash of water on rocks. I walked down to the beach and sat on a driftwood log, watching the tide roll in. Elise's face flashed through my mind, her smirk in court, her panic at the end, but it didn't sting anymore. She'd lost everything. I'd walked away with more than she'd ever meant to give me. But it wasn't about that. It was about me, about finally stepping out of her shadow and into something of my own. The days in Pacifica stretched out, slow and simple. I'd grab coffee downtown, walk the shore, let the salt air clear my head. One night, I sat on the cabin's porch with a beer, the sky dark and dotted with stars. My phone sat inside, off since I'd arrived, and I didn't miss it. Leo had texted before I left. You good? And I'd said, yeah, meaning it. Tara called too. You took her down, you know that? I'd smiled. We did, I'd said, because it wasn't just me. Leo, Ava, Tara, even Jasmine, they'd all had a hand in it. But now they were back there, and I was here, alone in a way that didn't feel lonely. The next day, I bought a cheap fishing rod on impulse. Back at the beach, I cast the line out and waited. Nothing bit, but I didn't care. It wasn't about the fish. It was about figuring out who I was without her. On my last evening at the beach before extending my cabin rental, I sat watching the sunset. An older man settled on the sand nearby. You staying or passing through? He asked, voice rough. I considered the question. A month ago, I would have had my life mapped out in a spreadsheet, every goal tied to Elise and Prism Digital. Now, the future was wide open. Staying, I said, surprising myself with how right it felt. For now, at least. He nodded. Good fishing here, if you know where to look. I smiled. I'm learning. Aren't we all? He said. Later, walking back to the cabin, my phone buzzed the first time I'd turned it on in days. A text from Ava, "You okay out there?" I stopped, looking back at the ocean. The waves kept rolling, endless and steady, indifferent to human dramas. "Better than okay," I typed back. "I'm finding my way." And I was. Not back to who I'd been before Elise, but forward to someone who knew his worth, who wouldn't disappear into someone else's shadow again. The cabin light glowed warm in the distance, a beacon guiding me home. Not the home I'd shared with Elise, built on lies, but something simpler, truer. Just mine. I slipped the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. The paper trail had led me here not to victory or vengeance, but to this quiet moment of clarity. The ocean rolled on, and I watched it, feeling like a man who'd finally walked away not from her, but towards something better.